Dear listener, welcome to this serene evening with Miss Marple, where the whispers of a quaint English village unfold into a tapestry of gentle mystery. Allow yourself to nestle into your pillows, perhaps with a warm blanket drawn close, as we venture into the cottage secret. Imagine the soft glow of lamplight in St. Mary Mead during the summer of 1932, where honeysuckle vines entwine thatched roofs and the air hums with the distant chime of church bells. A light breeze carries the scent of blooming roses, setting a mood of peaceful curiosity amid hidden shadows. If drowsiness calls, surrender to it. Let the story cradle you into dreams. And should you stir with thoughts, share them below. Such reflections enrich our shared journey. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. Whispers in the Village Lane. The village of St. Mary Mead, nestled in the gentle folds of the English countryside, shimmered in the golden light of a summer morning in 1932. Its cobblestone lanes, bordered by hedgerows bursting with honeysuckle and wild roses, wound like delicate threads through a patchwork of thatched cottages and ancient oaks. The air carried the sweet perfume of blooming gardens, mingling with the faint chime of St. Mary's church bells, their notes drifting over the meadows like a call to quiet reflection. It was a place where time seemed to pause, where the rhythms of life followed the seasons rather than the clamor of the modern world. Yet, beneath this serene veneer, secrets stirred like ripples beneath the surface of a still pond, and on this particular morning, the village was poised on the cusp of a mystery that would unsettle its tranquil heart. At the end of Daffodil Lane stood Rose Cottage, a quaint, ivy-clad dwelling with diamond-paned windows that caught the sunlight like prisms. Its garden was a riot of color. Foxgloves nodding in the breeze, lavender spilling over stone paths, and a trellis heavy with climbing roses that seemed to whisper tales of forgotten summers. The cottage belonged to Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, a retired schoolteacher of 68, whose diminutive frame and silver curls belied a mind as sharp as a quill. Her face, etched with fine lines from years of patient instruction, was framed by spectacles that magnified her twinkling hazel eyes, which missed little in the village's tapestry of gossip and goodwill. Eleanor was a guardian of St. Mary Mead's lore, her memory a living archive of births, marriages, and betrayals, her gentle probing often exposing hypocrisies with the precision of a poet. Yet her own past held a quiet sorrow, a love lost to war decades ago, a wound she concealed beneath her cheerful demeanor, though it lent her an air of wistful authority. Psychologically, Eleanor was a paradox, a woman of boundless curiosity tempered by discretion, her warmth masking a steely resolve to uphold truth. Her occupation as a schoolteacher had honed her ability to read character, but it also made her a figure of subtle power, her knowledge of village secrets a double-edged sword that earned her both admiration and wariness. On this morning, she had invited a small circle of intimates to her parlor for tea, an event billed as a simple gathering but laced with the promise of revelations, a word she had dropped with a mischievous glint during Sunday's church service. The village buzzed with speculation, for Eleanor's revelations were never trivial. They stirred hearts and rattled skeletons. The parlor, a cozy haven of chintz curtains and polished oak, was bathed in the soft glow of sunlight filtering through lace. A walnut table held a floral teapot, its steam curling like a wisp of intrigue, alongside a sugar bowl and a tray of scones fragrant with currants. The first to arrive was Miss Lydia Beaumont, Eleanor's niece, a vibrant woman of 35 whose auburn waves cascaded over a freckled complexion that spoke of hours spent in the sun. Clad in a linen dress the color of cornflowers, Lydia moved with the restless grace of a botanist, her hands stained faintly with plant sap from her studies of local flora. Her motive for attending was shadowed by inheritance. Whispers in the village suggested Eleanor was reconsidering her will, potentially diverting her modest fortune to a children's charity rather than her only kin. Psychologically, Lydia was a blend of warmth and ambition, her easy laughter a veneer for an impatience that simmered like a kettle on low heat. As she settled into a wing-back chair, her fingers toyed with a sprig of lavender, her smile bright but her eyes watchful. "Dearest Auntie," Lydia said, her voice as light as the breeze, "your garden is a marvel this year. Have you considered my idea for a botanical preserve? Rose Cottage could be its heart." Her words were a gentle probe, testing Eleanor's intentions, but the older woman merely smiled, her spectacles glinting. "Patience, Lydia. Gardens grow in their own time, as do legacies." Next came Reverend Thomas Hale, the vicar of St. Mary's, a lanky man of 50 whose balding pate gleamed under the parlor's light. His wire-rimmed glasses framed watery blue eyes that seemed perpetually on the verge of tears, a trait that lent his sermons an earnest sincerity. Clad in a threadbare cassock, he carried a leather-bound prayer book, though his fingers fidgeted as if seeking something less holy. His motive was tied to a church restoration fund, which Eleanor had questioned after noticing discrepancies in the ledgers, a matter that threatened his reputation. Psychologically, Hale was a man caught between piety and practicality, his devotion genuine but his financial acumen suspect, his gentle demeanor masking a quiet dread of exposure. He nodded to Lydia, his voice soft. "Mrs. Hargrove, your hospitality is a blessing. The village is fortunate to have your wisdom." Eleanor's lips twitched. "Wisdom, Thomas, is only as good as the truths it uncovers." The postman, Mr. Harold Finch, arrived next, his bicycle propped against the garden gate, its bell jingling faintly as he dusted off his uniform. At 42, Finch was a sturdy figure with ruddy cheeks and a squint honed by years of delivering letters in all weathers. His hands, calloused from handling parcels, betrayed a nervous energy as he entered, his eyes darting to the tea tray. His grudge against Eleanor stemmed from a public reprimand years prior, when she had caught him pilfering small sums from opened mail, costing him a coveted promotion to postmaster. Psychologically, Finch was a man of opportunistic resentment, his jovial banter a mask for a spite that festered like damp rot. "Morning, Mrs. Hargrove," he said, his tone overly hearty. "Fine day for secrets, eh?" Eleanor's smile was enigmatic. "The post always brings surprises, Harold, some less welcome than others." Mrs. Agatha Croft, the village seamstress and Eleanor's neighbor, bustled in with a basket of mending, her plump figure swathed in a floral apron that matched the cottage's curtains. At 55, her rosy cheeks and darting brown eyes gave her the air of a cheerful sparrow, though her quick glances betrayed a deeper unease. Her motive was rooted in a decades-old rivalry. She and Eleanor had once vied for the same suitor, a dashing soldier who chose Eleanor, leaving Agatha with a wound that time had not fully healed. Psychologically, she was a whirlwind of domestic energy, her chatter a shield for an envy that simmered beneath her neighborly facade. "Eleanor, your roses outshine mine again," she said, her voice warm but edged. "Some secrets to share there, perhaps?" Eleanor chuckled softly. "Roses thrive on care, Agatha, not secrets, though both require tending." Last to arrive was Dr. Edmund Vale, the village physician, a handsome man of 38 with dark hair swept back and a smile that disarmed even the most skeptical patients. His tailored jacket and polished shoes spoke of ambition, though his hazel eyes held a flicker of unease as he greeted Eleanor. His motive was a closely guarded error. Eleanor had discovered a misdiagnosis that nearly cost a villager's life, a mistake that could ruin his fledgling practice if exposed. Psychologically, Vale was a blend of charm and calculation, his bedside manner a polished veneer over a mind that weighed every word for risk. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said, bowing slightly, "your vitality puts my tonics to shame." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Flattery, Edmund, is a tonic of its own, but truth is stronger medicine." The parlor hummed with polite conversation, the clink of teacups and the rustle of linen napkins filling the air like a delicate overture. The sunlight streaming through the windows cast dappled patterns on the floor, a contrast to the undercurrents of tension that wove through the gathering. Lydia spoke of her latest botanical find, a rare orchid, her enthusiasm tinged with a plea for approval. Reverend Hale recounted a sermon on forgiveness, his words faltering as Eleanor's gaze lingered on him. Finch jested about wayward letters, his laughter too loud, while Agatha reminisced about village fates, her nostalgia laced with barbed references to past rivalries. Dr. Vale offered health advice, his charm effortless, but his hands betraying a slight tremor as he stirred his tea. Eleanor, presiding over the table like a benevolent matriarch, poured from the floral teapot with practiced grace, her silver curls catching the light. She passed the sugar bowl, its crystal facets sparkling, unaware that it held a deadly secret. Strychnine, a poison as swift as it was merciless, cunningly disguised among the granules. "Two old friends and new revelations," she declared, raising her cup in a toast that carried a weight none could fully grasp. The others followed suit, their cups lifted in a moment of uneasy unity, the air thick with unspoken motives. Lydia sipped daintily, her eyes flickering to her aunt. "To family," she murmured, her voice soft but her fingers tightening on the porcelain. Hale's cup trembled slightly, his prayer-like murmur barely audible. Finch gulped his tea, his squint narrowing as if to shield his thoughts. Agatha's smile was brittle, her sip measured, while Vale's calm facade held firm, though his knuckles whitened around the handle. As the clock on the mantel chimed 11, its notes clear and bright, Eleanor took a generous sip, savoring the tea's warmth. Moments later, her face contorted, a gasp escaping her lips as her hand flew to her throat. The teacup slipped from her grasp, shattering on the oak table, the sugar bowl tipping over in the chaos, its contents spilling like a cascade of betrayal. Eleanor's body convulsed, her spectacles slipping as she slumped forward, her silver curls falling into disarray. The parlor erupted in pandemonium, Lydia's cry of "Auntie!" piercing the air, Hale's prayers rising in a frantic litany, Finch's oaths jarring, Agatha's hands fluttering helplessly, and Vale rushing to her side, his physician's instincts futile against the poison's grip. Strychnine, insidious and swift, had woven its deadly spell, mimicking a seizure but leaving telltale signs, a faint rigidity in Eleanor's frame, a bitter aftertaste in the spilled sugar. The sunlight, once warm, now seemed cold, casting stark shadows across the parlor. The suspects, their faces a gallery of shock and suspicion, stood frozen, each grappling with the weight of their motives: inheritance, disgrace, resentment, jealousy, error. The village lane outside fell hushed, the roses silent witnesses to the tragedy within. As the church bells tolled a mournful note, the chapter drew to a close, the air thick with questions unanswered. Rose Cottage, once a haven, was now a stage for mystery, its secrets poised to unravel under the keen gaze of one who saw beyond the surface. Miss Jane Marple, whose arrival would soon stir the quiet waters of St. Mary Mead. The whispers in the lane faded, leaving only the promise of truth to come, as delicate and persistent as the honeysuckle's scent. Chapter 2. Shadows Over the Garden Gate. As twilight draped St. Mary Mead in a velvet cloak of indigo, the once welcoming glow of Rose Cottage took on an eerie pallor, its diamond-paned windows reflecting the last embers of a fading sunset. The garden, so vibrant in the morning's light, now seemed to hold its breath, its roses and lavender shrouded in mist that curled like ghostly fingers around the wrought-iron gate. The air carried a chill, the scent of damp earth mingling with the faint sweetness of honeysuckle, a reminder of the day's earlier warmth now tainted by tragedy. The village, usually alive with the soft hum of evening chatter, lay hushed, as if the cobblestone lanes themselves mourned the loss of Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, whose sudden death had cast a shadow over the heart of St. Mary Mead. The parlor, where the fatal tea had been served, stood silent, its overturned sugar bowl and shattered teacup a stark tableau of betrayal, the strychnine's invisible presence lingering like a whispered curse. Word of Eleanor's demise spread swiftly, carried by the villagers' hushed tones as they gathered at garden gates and church steps. By dusk, the local constable, Mr. Henry Puddock, a portly man with a walrus mustache and a penchant for order, had secured the cottage, his heavy boots thudding on the oak floor as he muttered about foul play. Yet it was not Puddock's arrival that stirred the air with anticipation, but the unassuming figure who slipped quietly through the garden gate, her straw hat tilted against the evening breeze. Miss Jane Marple, the spinster detective of St. Mary Mead, was a familiar sight in the village, her frail frame and white hair tucked into a neat bun belying a mind as sharp as the knitting needles she carried in her tapestry bag. At 70-odd years, her pale blue eyes, framed by half-moon spectacles, gleamed with a quiet acuity, missing nothing in the tapestry of human behavior. Psychologically, Miss Marple was a study in understated brilliance, her village wisdom a lens through which she discerned the universal truths of greed, envy, and deceit, her gentle demeanor a cloak for a relentless pursuit of justice. Miss Marple's arrival was unbidden, prompted by a neighbor's breathless account of the tragedy as she sipped tea at the vicarage. "A poisoning, Miss Marple," the neighbor had whispered, "right in Eleanor's parlor." The words had pricked her curiosity, and now, as she stepped into the cottage, her sensible shoes silent on the flagstones, she surveyed the scene with the calm precision of a botanist examining a rare specimen. The parlor was as she had last seen it at Eleanor's spring tea. Chintz curtains, polished oak table, and a fireplace now cold, its embers a faint glow. But the air was heavy with discord. The overturned sugar bowl, its crystal facets catching the lamplight, spilled granules across the table. The shattered teacup, its floral pattern fractured into jagged pieces, and a faint, bitter scent, a red herring suggesting cyanide but contradicted by the rigidity of Eleanor's body, a hallmark of strychnine's cruel grip. Miss Marple knelt beside the table, her gloved fingers hovering over the sugar bowl, her nose wrinkling at the deceptive scent. "Curious," she murmured to herself, her voice soft as the rustle of leaves. "Strychnine has no odor, Yet this hint of almonds, a deliberate misdirection, perhaps. Her eyes traced the room, noting a smudge of earth on the windowsill where the sash had been left ajar, and footprints in the soft garden soil outside, their edges softened by the evening mist. A lace handkerchief, embroidered with the initial L, lay crumpled near the table, its delicate fabric stained with a faint greenish tinge. Plant sap, perhaps, or something more sinister. Constable Puddock, hovering awkwardly, cleared his throat. "Miss Marple, this ain't your usual knitting circle. Poison, doctor says. Nasty business. You sure you want to poke about?" She smiled faintly, her spectacles glinting. "My dear Mr. Puddock, the human heart is a tangle far knottier than any skein of wool. I merely wish to understand its threads." Puddock grunted, unconvinced, but stepped aside, allowing her to begin her quiet inquiries. The suspects, summoned back to the cottage by Puddock's insistence, lingered in the parlor, their faces a gallery of shock, guilt, and wariness. Miss Lydia Beaumont stood by the window, her auburn hair catching the lamplight, her freckled hands clasped tightly to still their trembling. Her linen dress, now creased, bore a faint thorn scratch on the sleeve, a clue to her morning's work in the garden, or something less innocent. "Auntie was so vital," Lydia said, her voice breaking as she met Miss Marple's gaze. Who could do such a thing? Her grief seemed genuine, but Miss Marple noted a psychological tell. The way Lydia's eyes flickered to the sugar bowl, as if calculating its significance. Her motive, fear of a changed will, was a shadow that loomed large, her botanical knowledge a potential key to the poison's source. Miss Marple's gentle probe was deceptively casual. "Lydia, dear, you were tending the roses this morning, were you not? Such delicate work, yet thorns can be treacherous." Lydia nodded, her fingers brushing the scratch. "Yes, I was pruning near the gate. I came straight in for tea." But the footprints outside, Miss Marple noted, were deep, suggesting haste, and the handkerchief's stain hinted at more than rose sap. Perhaps a plant like Nux vomica, from which strychnine was derived. Reverend Thomas Hale sat stiffly in a chair, his lanky frame hunched, his wire-rimmed glasses fogging slightly as he murmured a prayer. His watery eyes avoided the table, his hands clutching his prayer book like a lifeline. Miss Marple approached, her tone soothing. "Reverend, Eleanor spoke of the church fund. Discrepancies, she said. Did they weigh on you?" Hale's face flushed, his voice faltering. "A misunderstanding, nothing more. I was preparing for evensong when this happened." Yet Miss Marple noted a timeline inconsistency. The church bells, usually punctual, had rung 5 minutes late that morning, suggesting Hale's absence from the vestry. His motive, covering financial irregularities, was a thread that tugged at her curiosity, his piety a fragile veneer. Mr. Harold Finch, the postman, stood near the door, his ruddy cheeks flushed with agitation, his squint narrowing as he surveyed the room. His uniform was slightly askew, a sign of his hurried return. "Delivered my rounds, then came for tea," he said brusquely, his voice loud in the quiet. "Saw nothing amiss." But Miss Marple's keen eyes caught a clue. A crumpled envelope, half hidden under a cushion, its wax seal broken, suggesting tampering. Finch's grudge against Eleanor, for exposing his petty pilfering, was a motive that burned like a slow fuse, his jovial facade a mask for opportunistic spite. "Harold," she said mildly, "you handle so many letters. Did any carry secrets that troubled you?" His squint tightened, a psychological slip. "Letters are private, Miss Marple. I just deliver 'em." Mrs. Agatha Croft, the seamstress, hovered by the fireplace, her plump figure fidgeting with a skein of thread from her apron pocket. Her rosy cheeks were pale, her brown eyes darting like a sparrow's. "We were just chatting, Eleanor and I, about old times," she said, her voice quavering. "No harm in that." But Miss Marple's gentle probe stirred a deeper truth. "Old times, Agatha. Rivalries, perhaps. The heart holds memories tightly." Agatha's lips trembled, a confession slipping out. "She won him, you know, James, all those years ago, but I forgave her. Her jealousy, though softened by time, was a motive that lingered, her domestic bustle a shield for unhealed wounds." A thimble, dropped near the sugar bowl, caught Miss Marple's eye. A red herring, perhaps, as Agatha's sewing was constant, but its placement was curious. Dr. Edmund Vale, the physician, stood by the table, his handsome features composed, but his hazel eyes betraying a flicker of unease. He had pronounced Eleanor's death, his voice steady as he described the symptoms: convulsions, rigidity. Yet his gloves, discarded on a sideboard, bore faint grains of sugar, a clue that piqued Miss Marple's interest. "Edmund," she said, her tone conversational, "Eleanor's health was sound, yet you visited often. Was there a concern?" Vale's smile was disarming, but his hands twitched. Routine checks, nothing more. Her vitality was remarkable. His motive, a medical error Eleanor had uncovered, cast a shadow, his charm a polished veneer over a calculating mind. As the lamplight cast long shadows across the parlor, Miss Marple moved to the garden gate, where the mist curled like a living thing. The footprints outside, deep and uneven, suggested a hurried exit, their size matching none of the suspects precisely. A deliberate misdirection, perhaps, with boots borrowed or altered. The handkerchief, with its greenish stain, lay heavy in her thoughts. Lydia's botanical expertise made her a suspect, yet the stain could be a plant dye, a clever ruse. The envelope under the cushion, addressed to Eleanor, hinted at blackmail, its contents vague but threatening. Reveal nothing, or all is lost. A red herring, Miss Marple mused, designed to scatter suspicion. The suspects dispersed, their alibis fraying like old lace. Lydia retreated to her greenhouse, her grief a mask for calculation. Hale shuffled to the church, his prayers a shield for guilt. Finch pedaled off, his squint hiding secrets. Agatha bustled home, her thread tangled with regret. Vale lingered, his charm a fragile defense. Miss Marple settled into a rocking chair by the cottage's hearth, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, each stitch a step toward truth. The garden gate creaked in the breeze, its iron vines a silent witness to the day's turmoil, the shadows lengthening as night enveloped St. Mary Mead. The chapter closed with a quiet resolve, the parlor's lamplight a beacon in the mist. Miss Marple's pale eyes gleamed, her mind weaving the clues, footprints, handkerchief, envelope, sugar grains, into a pattern only she could discern. The village, so serene in its daily rhythms, was now a stage for deception, its secrets poised to unravel under her gentle scrutiny. The gate's creak faded into the night, a prelude to deeper revelations, as the stars above St. Mary Mead glimmered with the promise of justice yet to come. Chapter 3. Echoes from the churchyard. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a delicate flush, as if the sky itself hesitated to unveil the secrets that lingered from the previous day's tragedy at Rose Cottage. The village, cradled in the gentle embrace of rolling meadows and ancient hedgerows, stirred softly under a chorus of blackbirds, their songs weaving through the morning mist like threads of hope. The cobblestone lanes glistened with dew, and the scent of damp grass mingled with the faint perfume of blooming jasmine, a reminder of the village's enduring charm despite the shadow cast by Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove's sudden death. The churchyard of St. Mary's, its weathered yews standing sentinel over moss-covered graves, held a quiet solemnity. The stones etched with names and dates that whispered of lives long past, and secrets buried deep. It was here, among these silent echoes, that Miss Jane Marple began her day, her straw hat shielding eyes that saw beyond the surface, her mind a tapestry of village wisdom poised to unravel the mystery of the cottage secret. Miss Marple, at 70-odd years, was a figure of deceptive fragility, her white hair tucked neatly into a bun, her pale blue eyes sharp behind half-moon spectacles. Clad in a tweed skirt and a cardigan the color of faded lavender, she carried a tapestry bag that held her knitting, a notebook, and a mind as incisive as the needles she wielded. Psychologically, she was a quiet force, her observations rooted in decades of watching St. Mary Mead's inhabitants, her understanding of human nature, a lens that revealed the universal in the particular. She had spent the night reflecting on the parlor's clues, the overturned sugar bowl laced with strychnine, the smudged footprints outside the window, the lace handkerchief with its greenish stain, the cryptic envelope hinting at blackmail. Each was a thread in a complex weave, and as she stepped into the churchyard, the morning air crisp against her cheeks, she felt the pull of truth drawing her forward. The churchyard was a place of contemplation, its ancient stones tilted by time, their inscriptions softened by lichen. Miss Marple paused by a grave marked for a long-ago Hargrove, her fingers tracing the weathered name as she considered Eleanor's role as the village's keeper of secrets. The schoolteacher's death, so sudden and deliberate, was no accident. The strychnine, slipped into the sugar bowl, required knowledge of her habits, her penchant for 2 lumps in her tea, and a cold precision that pointed to someone close. The suspects, Lydia Beaumont, Reverend Thomas Hale, Harold Finch, Agatha Croft, and Dr. Edmund Vale. Each carried motives as varied as the wildflowers in the meadow: inheritance, disgrace, resentment, jealousy, and professional ruin. The churchyard's silence seemed to amplify their secrets, urging Miss Marple to listen. Her first encounter was with Lydia Beaumont, found kneeling by a headstone, her auburn hair windswept, a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. The young botanist's linen dress was streaked with earth, her freckled face pale but composed. "Good morning, Miss Marple," Lydia said, her voice soft but strained, as if the weight of grief pressed against her words. "I come here to think. It's peaceful." Miss Marple's eyes, gentle but probing, noted the tension in Lydia's posture, the way her fingers clutched the flowers like a lifeline. "A lovely gesture, dear," she replied, her tone as soothing as chamomile. "Inheritance rumors must be trying. Did Eleanor's plans for her will trouble you?" Lydia's emerald eyes flickered, a psychological tell. "Auntie was generous, but she spoke of charities lately. I respected her wishes." Yet Miss Marple spotted a clue, a folded letter peeking from Lydia's pocket, its edge bearing Eleanor's distinctive script. When pressed, Lydia admitted it was a draft of the will, found in the cottage's desk, confirming the shift to charity, a motive sharpened by desperation. The letter was a revelation, its contents outlining Eleanor's intent to fund an orphanage, leaving Lydia with only a modest annuity. "I didn't resent her," Lydia insisted, but her voice wavered, and the greenish stain on her handkerchief, now tucked in her sleeve, suggested familiarity with plants like Nux vomica, a source of strychnine. Miss Marple filed this away, her mind noting the timeline. Lydia claimed to have been pruning roses at 10:30. Yet the deep footprints outside the parlor window, found the previous evening, suggested a later, hurried presence. The discrepancy was subtle, but it tugged at the edges of Lydia's alibi like a loose stitch. Miss Marple wandered to the vestry, where Reverend Thomas Hale was polishing communion silver, his lanky frame bent over a chalice, his wire-rimmed glasses fogging with effort. The vestry was a cool, stone-walled sanctuary, its air scented with beeswax and old hymnals, but Hale's watery eyes were evasive, his hands trembling slightly. "Reverend," Miss Marple said, her voice as gentle as a hymn. "Eleanor's questions about the church fund, did they weigh heavily?" Hale's face flushed, his fingers fumbling the cloth. "A misunderstanding, Miss Marple. The books were muddled, but my heart is pure." Yet a psychological clue emerged. His prayers, usually fluent, stumbled, and a glance at his desk revealed a ledger with crossed-out figures, suggesting forged receipts to cover personal expenses. Miss Marple probed further. "You were preparing for evensong, you said, but the bells rang late yesterday. 5 minutes, I believe." Hale's flush deepened, his alibi fraying. The bell's delay placed him away from the church, possibly near Rose Cottage at the critical hour. The ledger, when examined, showed discrepancies totaling £50, a sum Hale attributed to clerical errors, but which Eleanor had flagged as suspicious. His motive, covering financial folly, was clear, his piety a fragile shield. Miss Marple's mind whirred, noting the timeline inconsistency as a thread to be tugged, her gentle smile masking the sharpness of her scrutiny. In the village square, she encountered Harold Finch, the postman, pedaling his bicycle with a sack of letters slung over his shoulder. His ruddy cheeks were flushed, his squint more pronounced as he spotted her. "Morning, Miss Marple," he called, his tone forced. "Terrible business at the cottage." She nodded, her eyes catching a glint of something in his satchel. A sugar packet, its wrapping identical to the one found spilled in the parlor. "Harold," she said mildly, "you handle so many parcels. Did any carry surprises for Eleanor?" Finch's squint tightened, a psychological slip. "Just letters, ma'am. Nothing out of the ordinary." But when pressed, he admitted delivering a package to Eleanor the previous week, its contents unknown but suspiciously heavy. The sugar packet, retrieved from his satchel, bore a faint tear, suggesting tampering, and its presence in the parlor was a physical clue that sharpened his motive. Resentment over Eleanor's exposure of his pilfering, which had cost him a promotion. Miss Marple's next stop was Mrs. Agatha Croft's cottage, a stone's throw from Rose Cottage, its windows adorned with lace as intricate as its owner's sewing. Agatha was in her garden, snipping herbs with a pair of shears, her plump figure swathed in a floral apron, her rosy cheeks pale with worry. "Eleanor and I were old friends," she said, her brown eyes darting like sparrows. "Such a loss." Miss Marple's probe was delicate. "Friendships endure much, Agatha, but rivalries linger. A suitor, perhaps, from years past?" Agatha's shears paused, a drop of blood welling from a pricked finger. "James chose her, yes, but that's long buried." Yet her voice trembled, revealing a jealousy that had not fully faded, a motive that simmered beneath her domestic bustle. A red herring emerged, a thimble found near the sugar bowl, likely dropped during her mending at the tea, but Agatha's alibi was solid, confirmed by a neighbor who saw her weeding at 10:45. The thimble, though, was a distraction, its placement too convenient to ignore. Dr. Edmund Vale was found in his surgery, a tidy room lined with bottles and instruments, the air sharp with antiseptic. His handsome features were composed, but his hazel eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as Miss Marple entered. "Edmund," she said, her tone conversational. Eleanor's notes mentioned a medical concern, a misdiagnosis, perhaps. Vale's smile tightened, his hands adjusting a vial on the shelf. She was mistaken, Miss Marple. A patient recovered fully. But a file on his desk, left open, revealed Eleanor's handwritten account of a near-fatal error involving digitalis, a mistake that could ruin his practice. His motive was clear, his charm a polished defense. A physical clue surfaced. A vial of strychnine, locked in a cabinet but with a key left carelessly nearby, suggesting access. His gloves, still bearing sugar grains, were a thread that tied him to the scene, though he claimed they were from a spilled jar in his surgery. As the midday sun warmed the churchyard, casting dappled light through the yews, Miss Marple sat on a bench, her knitting needles clicking like a metronome. The clues wove together in her mind. Lydia's letter and stained handkerchief, Hale's forged receipts and late bells, Finch's sugar packet and grudge, Agatha's thimble and lingering envy, Vale's strychnine vial and hidden error. Each suspect's alibi was a fragile thread, their motives a tangle of human frailties, greed, shame, resentment, jealousy, fear. The footprints outside the window, she mused, were a deliberate misdirection, their size altered by oversized boots to confuse. The envelope's blackmail note, too, was a plant, its vague threat designed to scatter suspicion. The churchyard's silence was a balm, its graves a reminder of time's patient unraveling. Miss Marple's pale eyes gleamed, her mind sorting the threads with the precision of a weaver. The strychnine, she reasoned, required access and intent, placed by someone who knew Eleanor's habits intimately. Lydia's botanical knowledge, Hale's financial desperation, Finch's opportunistic spite, Agatha's buried envy, Vale's professional peril. Each was a knot to be untied. The chapter closed with a quiet resolve, the birdsong fading into a contemplative pause, the yews' shadows lengthening as Miss Marple rose, her steps light but purposeful, ready to follow the next thread in the tapestry of St. Mary Mead's secrets. Chapter 4. Secrets in the Sewing Basket. The afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, its rays filtering through the ancient oaks and casting dappled patterns across the cobblestone lanes. The village, nestled in the verdant embrace of the English countryside, hummed with the gentle rhythms of summer. Bees droning among the lavender, the distant clatter of a milk cart, the soft laughter of children playing by the brook. Yet, beneath this idyllic surface, a current of unease rippled, stirred by the tragedy at Rose Cottage, where Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove's life had been snuffed out by strychnine slipped into her sugar bowl. The air, scented with honeysuckle and warm earth, carried a faint undercurrent of suspicion, as if the very flowers whispered of secrets yet to be unveiled. It was in this delicate balance of serenity and shadow that Miss Jane Marple pursued her quiet investigation, her frail figure moving through the village like a thread through a needle's eye, stitching together the clues to the cottage secret. Miss Marple, at 70-odd years, was a study in understated elegance, her white hair coiled in a neat bun, her pale blue eyes sharp behind half-moon spectacles. Her tweed skirt and lavender cardigan blended seamlessly with the village's pastoral charm. Yet her tapestry bag, slung over her arm, held more than knitting needles. It cradled a mind that wove human frailties into patterns of truth. Psychologically, she was a master of observation, her decades in St. Mary Mead honing an instinct for the subtle tells of deceit. A glance too quick, a pause too long, a smile too brittle. The clues from the previous day's inquiries, the stained handkerchief, the forged ledger, the suspicious sugar packet, the misplaced thimble, the strychnine vial, danced in her mind like threads in a loom, each demanding careful handling to avoid tangling the truth. Her morning in the churchyard had sharpened her focus, the grave's silent stories urging her to delve deeper into the motives of the suspects. Lydia Beaumont's fear of disinheritance, Reverend Thomas Hale's financial shame, Harold Finch's festering grudge, Agatha Croft's lingering jealousy, and Dr. Edmund Vale's professional peril. Now, as the sun climbed toward its zenith, Miss Marple made her way to Mrs. Agatha Croft's cottage, a stone's throw from Rose Cottage, its thatched roof adorned with climbing roses that mirrored its neighbor's charm. The seamstress's home was a haven of domesticity, its windows framed with lace curtains as intricate as the patterns she stitched, the air inside rich with the scent of beeswax polish and freshly cut herbs. Agatha was at her work table, her plump figure swathed in a floral apron, her rosy cheeks flushed as she threaded a needle through a quilt of vibrant patches. Her brown eyes, usually darting like curious sparrows, were clouded with worry as she greeted Miss Marple. "Oh, Jane, what a dreadful thing," she said, her voice quavering like a plucked string. "Eleanor, gone so suddenly. It's shaken us all?" Miss Marple settled into a cushioned chair, her knitting needles emerging from her bag, their rhythmic clicking a soothing counterpoint to the tension. "Indeed, Agatha," she replied, her tone as gentle as a summer breeze. "Friendships endure much, but old rivalries, they linger like threads caught in a seam, don't they?" Agatha's needle paused, a faint flush deepening her cheeks. "You mean James, I suppose. He chose Eleanor, yes, but that was decades ago. I've made my peace." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, noting the slight tremble in Agatha's fingers, a psychological tell of unresolved pain. "Peace is a fine stitch, but some wounds fray easily," she said softly. "You visited Eleanor often. Did you notice anything amiss?" Agatha's lips tightened, her gaze dropping to the quilt. "We mended fabrics, not hearts. But Dr. Vale was there more than needed, always with his tonics. Odd for a woman so healthy." The revelation, dropped like a misplaced pin, pricked Miss Marple's interest. Vale's frequent visits suggested more than professional diligence, perhaps a secret liaison or a cover for his error. Yet Agatha's sewing basket, brimming with threads and notions, held no trace of poison. A red herring that cleared her of direct involvement, but sharpened the focus on her observations. As Miss Marple sipped tea from Agatha's chipped china, Lydia Beaumont arrived, her auburn hair wind-swept, a sketchbook tucked under her arm. Her freckled face was composed, but her emerald eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as she greeted the women. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Croft," she said, her voice bright but strained. "I was sketching by the brook. Orchids, you know. Such a comfort after yesterday." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze lingering on the sketchbook, its pages filled with meticulous drawings of plants, including one labeled Strychnos nux vomica, the source of strychnine. "Lovely work, Lydia," she said, her tone conversational. "Your knowledge of plants is remarkable. Did Eleanor share your passion?" Lydia's smile faltered, a psychological clue. "Auntie appreciated my studies, but she was more about books than blooms." The sketchbook was a revelation, its detailed annotations revealing Lydia's expertise in toxic flora, a motive sharpened by the will's shift to charity. Miss Marple probed gently. "You were pruning roses before tea, dear, but your hands, such scratches. Were you perhaps studying something more potent?" Lydia's fingers brushed a thorn mark, her voice defensive. "Just roses, Miss Marple. I'm no poisoner." Yet the greenish stain on her handkerchief, now tucked in her pocket, suggested otherwise, and Miss Marple noted a timeline discrepancy. Lydia's claim of gardening at 10:30 clashed with a neighbor's sighting of her near the cottage's back window at 10:45, moments before the tea was poured. Leaving Agatha's cottage, Miss Marple strolled to the vicarage, where Reverend Thomas Hale was tending a small herb garden, his lanky frame stooped over a patch of mint. His watery eyes blinked rapidly behind wire-rimmed glasses, his cassock stained with earth. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice a nervous quaver, "I've been praying for Eleanor's soul." Her smile was kind but probing. "Prayer is a comfort, Thomas, but truth brings peace. The church fund. Eleanor's questions troubled you, didn't they?" Hale's hands trembled, dropping a sprig of mint. "A clerical error, nothing more. I confessed as much to her last week." The confession was a thread pulled loose, revealing Hale's motive. Not embezzlement, but gambling debts covered by borrowed funds. A red herring cleared, but a shame that drove him to desperation. His late bells, Miss Marple recalled, placed him near the cottage, his alibi fraying like worn cloth. At the post office, Harold Finch was sorting letters, his ruddy cheeks flushed with exertion, his squint narrowing as Miss Marple approached. "Busy day, ma'am," he said brusquely, his hands shuffling envelopes with practiced speed. "No time for gossip." Miss Marple's tone was mild. "Letters carry stories, Harold, some less pleasant than others. Eleanor's reprimand must have stung." Finch's squint tightened. A psychological slip. She had no right, airing my mistakes like that. A physical clue emerged. A route map in his ledger showed a detour to Rose Cottage the morning of the tea, unlisted in his official rounds. When pressed, he admitted delivering an unmarked package to Eleanor, its contents unknown but suspiciously timed. The sugar packet from his satchel, identical to the parlor's, was a damning thread, his grudge a motive that burned brighter with each revelation. Miss Marple's final visit was to Dr. Edmund Vale's surgery, a pristine room lined with glass cabinets and the sharp scent of antiseptic. Vale, his dark hair swept back, greeted her with a disarming smile, but his hazel eyes flickered with unease. "Miss Marple, you're tireless," he said, his voice smooth. "I've told the constable all I know." She nodded, her gaze lingering on a cabinet where a strychnine vial sat, its label pristine but the lock's key left carelessly on the desk. "Edmund," she said, "Eleanor's notes mentioned a patient, a near-fatal error. Did she press you on it?" Vale's smile tightened, his hands adjusting a stethoscope. A misunderstanding, long resolved. But a file, partially hidden under a blotter, contained Eleanor's meticulous account of a digitalis overdose, a mistake that could ruin him. His gloves, still bearing sugar grains, were a physical clue, though he claimed they were from a spilled jar. A psychological tell emerged. His charm faltered when pressed, his fingers twitching like a nervous pulse. As evening hues painted the village in shades of amber and violet, Miss Marple returned to Rose Cottage, standing by the garden gate where the mist curled like a living thread. The footprints outside the window, she mused, were a deliberate misdirection, their size altered by oversized boots to confuse. The blackmail note found under the parlor cushion was another plant, its vague threat designed to scatter suspicion. But a new clue surfaced. A tiny crystal bead matching Agatha's sewing basket caught in the windowsill's crevice, suggesting someone had lingered there, perhaps watching or tampering. Agatha's alibi held, but her observation of Vale's visits was a thread that tightened the web. Miss Marple settled into a wicker chair in the cottage's garden, her knitting needles clicking like a metronome, the roses around her glowing in the twilight. The clues wove together in her mind. Lydia's toxic knowledge and stained handkerchief, Hale's gambling debts and late bells, Finch's detour and sugar packet, Agatha's bead and keen eyes, Vale's vial and sugar-stained gloves. Each suspect's motive, greed, shame, resentment, jealousy, fear, was a knot in the tapestry, their alibis fraying under scrutiny. The strychnine, she reasoned, required access and intent, placed by someone who knew Eleanor's sugar habit intimately. The bead, though, was a curious thread, pointing to a moment of carelessness that might unravel the truth. The village settled into evening, the brook's murmur a soothing underscore to Miss Marple's reflections. The church bells rang, punctual now, their notes a reminder of time's patient unraveling. The chapter closed with a contemplative hush, the garden gate creaking softly, its iron vines a silent witness to the secrets stirring within St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple's pale eyes gleamed, her mind a loom weaving the final threads, ready to mend the tear in the village's peace with the needle of justice. Chapter 5. The Unraveled Thread. The golden twilight of St. Mary Mead settled over the village like a soft shawl, its amber hues weaving through the ancient oaks and bathing the cobblestone lanes in a warm, forgiving light. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and cooling earth, the distant murmur of the brook blending with the evening's quietude, as if the village itself exhaled a sigh of relief after the turmoil of Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove's death. Rose Cottage, once a beacon of warmth, stood at the heart of Daffodil Lane, its ivy-clad walls and rose-trellised garden now a stage for the final act of a delicate tragedy. The parlor, where strychnine had claimed the beloved schoolteacher, glowed softly under lamplight, its chintz curtains framing a scene poised for revelation. Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster detective, stood ready to weave the threads of suspicion into a tapestry of truth, her presence a quiet promise of justice in the fading light. At 70-odd years, Miss Marple was a figure of deceptive simplicity, her white hair coiled in a neat bun, her pale blue eyes sharp behind half-moon spectacles. Her lavender cardigan and tweed skirt blended seamlessly with the village's pastoral charm. Yet her tapestry bag, slung over her arm, held a mind as incisive as the knitting needles within. Psychologically, she was a weaver of human nature, her decades in St. Mary Mead honing an instinct for the subtle tells of deceit. A glance averted, a word misplaced, a gesture too deliberate. The clues gathered over the past days, the stained handkerchief, the forged ledger, the sugar packet, the misplaced thimble, the strychnine vial, the crystal bead, formed a pattern in her mind, each thread carefully sorted to reveal the hand that had slipped poison into Eleanor's sugar bowl. The suspects, Lydia Beaumont, Reverend Thomas Hale, Harold Finch, Agatha Croft, and Dr. Edmund Vale, awaited her verdict, their motives a tangle of greed, shame, resentment, jealousy, and fear. Miss Marple had summoned the group to Rose Cottage's parlor, where the floral teapot and scattered sugar granules remained as silent witnesses to the crime. The room was bathed in the soft glow of oil lamps, their light casting flickering shadows across the oak table, where the shattered teacup lay like a broken vow. The suspects gathered in a semicircle, their faces a gallery of apprehension and guarded hope. Lydia stood by the window, her auburn hair catching the lamplight, her freckled hands clutching a sprig of lavender, her emerald eyes wary. Reverend Hale sat stiffly, his lanky frame hunched, his watery eyes blinking rapidly behind wire-rimmed glasses. Finch hovered near the door, his ruddy cheeks flushed, his squint narrowing as if to shield his thoughts. Agatha perched on a chair, her plump figure fidgeting with a skein of thread, her rosy cheeks pale with tension. Vale stood with practiced ease, his handsome features composed, but his hazel eyes betrayed a flicker of unease beneath his polished charm. Miss Marple stood at the table's head, her frail form commanding the room with the quiet authority of truth. Her voice, soft as the rustle of leaves, carried a weight that stilled the air. "My dear friends," she began, her tone as soothing as a lullaby, "a great wrong has been done in this cottage. Eleanor Hargrove, a woman of wisdom and heart, was taken from us by strychnine, slipped into her sugar bowl by one who knew her habits well. 2 lumps, always, in her tea. The clues, they are like threads in a quilt, each telling a story. Tonight, we shall sew them together and reveal the hand that unraveled her life." She turned first to Lydia, her gaze gentle but piercing. "Miss Beaumont, your love for your aunt was evident, yet the shadow of inheritance hung heavy. The letter in your pocket, outlining Eleanor's will, showed her intent to fund an orphanage, leaving you with little. Your sketchbook, with its drawing of Strychnos nux vomica, revealed a knowledge of poison, and the green stain on your handkerchief suggested more than rose sap. You claimed to be pruning at 10:30, yet a neighbor saw you near the cottage's back window at 10:45. A lie, perhaps, to conceal a darker act?" Lydia's lips parted, her voice trembling. "Miss Marple, I loved Auntie. I'd never harm her, will or no will." Her eyes welled, but Miss Marple noted the defensive clench of her hands, a psychological tell of calculation beneath grief. Next, she addressed Reverend Hale, whose fingers gripped his prayer book like a lifeline. "Reverend, your piety is a comfort, but your financial troubles cast a shadow. The ledger's forged receipts, hiding gambling debts, were a secret Eleanor uncovered. Your late bells, 5 minutes, I recall, placed you near the cottage at the critical hour. Did shame drive you to silence her?" Hale's face flushed, his voice a quaver. "I erred, yes, but only in coin, not in blood. I was in the vestry, praying." Miss Marple's smile was kind. "Prayer is a balm, but truth is a sharper remedy. Your debts were a motive, yet your heart lacks the coldness for murder." She turned to Finch, whose squint tightened as he shifted uneasily. "Mr. Finch, your grudge against Eleanor for exposing your pilfering cost you a promotion. The sugar packet in your satchel, identical to the parlor's, and your unlisted detour to the cottage suggest opportunity. The torn envelope, hinting at blackmail, was a clever plant, was it not?" Finch's cheeks reddened, his voice loud. "I delivered mail, nothing more. That packet was coincidence." But Miss Marple's eyes lingered on his hands, calloused and nervous, a psychological clue of opportunistic spite. "Coincidences, Harold, are rare in St. Mary Mead," she said softly. Agatha Croft, her needle poised over a quilt square, flinched as Miss Marple's gaze settled on her. "Mrs. Croft, your rivalry with Eleanor over a suitor long ago left a wound time did not heal. The crystal bead on the windowsill, matching your sewing basket, placed you near the scene. Your observation of Dr. Vale's visits was keen, but was it distraction? Agatha's rosy cheeks paled, her voice quavering. I envied her once, yes, but murder? Never. I was weeding, as Mrs. Tuttle saw. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. Jealousy is a sharp thread, Agatha, but your heart is too warm for such a deed. Finally, she faced Dr. Vale, whose charming smile faltered under her scrutiny. Dr. Vale, your professional error, a near-fatal misdiagnosis, Eleanor documented, threatening your practice. The strychnine vial in your surgery, the sugar grains on your gloves, and your frequent visits to a healthy woman suggest more than care. You were seen near the table at 10:50, not in your surgery as claimed. Vale's hazel eyes darkened, his voice steady but strained. Miss Marple, I cared for Eleanor. The gloves were from a spilled jar, nothing more. But his fingers twitched, a psychological tell of a man cornered. Miss Marple paused, letting the lamplight's glow settle over the room, the silence broken only by the brook's distant murmur. The strychnine, she continued, was placed in the sugar bowl by one who knew Eleanor's habits intimately, slipped in during the bustle before the toast. The footprints outside, oversized and blurred, were a misdirection. Boots borrowed to confuse. The blackmail note, vague and convenient, was another plant. The bead, the handkerchief, the packet, all threads, but one shines brightest. Her gaze returned to Vale, her voice soft but unyielding. Dr. Vale, it was you who wove this deadly pattern. Your error, documented by Eleanor, would have ruined you. A young doctor in a small village, your reputation fragile. You visited that morning under the guise of a checkup and slipped strychnine into the sugar bowl, knowing Eleanor's habit. The gloves, bearing sugar grains, were not from a jar, but from your tampering. The footprints, yours, were disguised with boots from the cottage's shed, found later with mud still fresh. The bead, dropped in haste, was a mistake, linking to Agatha's basket but pointing to your presence at the window, watching your plan unfold. Vale's composure shattered, his face blanching as he gripped the table. "You've no proof," he cried, but his voice cracked, a confession in its timbre. She would have exposed me. My career, my life. I panicked, yes, but I didn't mean— His words faltered, a raw admission spilling forth. I mixed the strychnine, just a pinch, thinking it would sicken her, not kill. I was desperate. The parlor gasped. Lydia's sob, Hale's murmured prayer, Finch's stunned silence, Agatha's trembling hands. Constable Puttock, who had slipped in quietly, stepped forward, his walrus mustache twitching as he clapped handcuffs on Vale. "That's enough, Doctor," he said gruffly. "You'll answer to the law now." Miss Marple's eyes softened, her needles stilling. Human nature, my dear friends, is a predictable thread, yet ever surprising in its twists. Lydia, your inheritance is secure, your grief honest. Reverend, your debts are a burden, but your soul is clear. Harold, your grudge was petty, not lethal. Agatha, your heart has mended. The cottage secret is unraveled, and St. Mary Mead may rest. As Puttock led Vale away, the lamplight flickered, casting a warm glow over the parlor. The suspects dispersed. Lydia to her greenhouse, Hale to his prayers, Finch to his rounds, Agatha to her quilts, each carrying a lighter heart. The roses outside nodded in the breeze, their petals a silent hymn to peace restored. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting resuming its rhythmic dance, her pale eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. "Sleep well, dear listener," she murmured, as if to an unseen audience, in the embrace of truths gently woven. The village settled into twilight, the brooks song a soothing lullaby, the church bells tolling a soft farewell. Rose Cottage stood once more as a haven, its secrets laid bare, its wounds mended by the delicate hand of justice. The narrative closed in serene fulfillment, no threads left dangling, only the promise of slumber in the heart of St. Mary Mead's eternal calm.